Now, the practice of eugenics, of creating a genetically superior human population, was championed by Adolf Hitler in his search for a pure race. Well, at one stage, the model he copied was being used across more than 30 American states. Only now, the state of Virginia has agreed to pay compensation to victims who decades ago were sterilised by the authorities forcibly. After a 3-year fight, survivors of the process will be paid around $25,000. Well, let's look at this a little bit more, because with me is Silvia Camporesi, who's a lecturer in Bioethics and Society at King's College London. Silvia, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Eugenics remains, courtesy of Adolf Hitler in particular, a dirty word. Can we draw a comparison with what's been going on in Virginia? Because it will shock a lot of people to know so many American states were doing that, and for so long.
Thank you, David. This is a very good question. Indeed, often we hear a comparison between eugenics in the past and DNA mitochondrial replacement therapy just recently, or other genetic technologies that we use today to select children in the context of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Now, I do not think that this comparison is justified. Now, in the Western world today, we have something, a concept that in bioethics we refer to as reproductive freedom. We think it is a right of individual to decide when and with whom to reproduce, and also what is good for our children, in this case also selecting children. In the past, in classical eugenics, this was not the case. It was not considered a right of the individual to have reproductive decisions, so the state was justified in intervening in sterilization procedure like the one in Virginia. So many don't know today, but even in Scandinavia, sterilization were going on up until the 70s. So I really don't think that this comparison is justified.
Right, so we shouldn't see it as malevolent as perhaps many of us would see it, but it is that key question, which particularly today we find difficult, freedom or the loss of freedom to decide.
Yes, freedom or loss of freedom to decide. So the negative connotation of the word eugenic is something more recent, a recent acquisition after World War II and the Holocaust. In the 1920s and 30s, eugenics did not have this negative connotation. Quite on the contrary, when the term was coined by Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's cousin, here in London in 1893, it was compared to a secular religion. Society had a duty to work towards a better race. But as I was saying, now we have this concept of reproductive freedom. Parents can choose what is good for their children. So, and they're free from interference from the state, at least in this part of the world.
Right. I mean, you mentioned that as late as the 1970s, these sort of programs were still going on. Is it clear that they are finished now? I mean, that really is history anywhere in the world in terms of the forced nature of those programs.
Yes, yes, this is finished. The Scandinavian countries, we had sterilization law up until the 70s. The fact is that often we don't hear this kind of discussion, but for example, in Scandinavia, the history of eugenics went hand in hand with the history of the welfare state. So society thought, okay, we are giving benefits to certain communities, but we are also putting weights of other members of the community, and that was considered okay. And the sterilization were for those part of the population that were considered feeble-minded. I don't know if you've heard this word, but it was an umbrella term that had was a catch-all term for many disabilities, but also for categories of exhausted mothers, who had too many children, could not take care of their children anymore. But again, when we hear eugenics, we read it in the news in comparison with mitochondrial replacement therapy or genetic technologies. I would be wary of this comparison.
Okay, and times change, don't they, Silvia? Thank you very much indeed, Silvia Camporesi.